Hi, I'm Connie Sokol, your host of Call to Create, and I am delighted with having our guest today, Brigham Taylor. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are so thrilled because he is all things Disney, having produced and been part of these beautiful movies that are part of our family culture. And we're going to talk about his trajectory and his growth and his journey of being called to create, of being a part of this incredible culture and experience. So I'll give you the official bio and then we're going to jump into the questions. Brigham Taylor worked as an executive with the Walt Disney Company. He produced Disney's 2016 The Jungle Book, 2015 Tomorrowland, and Pirates of the Caribbean series. He was a production executive for Million Dollar Arm, Tron Legacy, Secretariat, Bridge to Terabithia, and the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe 2005, to name a few. He also earned his bachelor's degree in humanities from Brigham Young University, and after graduating, he joined the Disney Company in 1994 as an assistant to a junior executive and rose through the ranks of the studio. He's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and served as a full-time missionary in Tallahassee, Florida. He and his wife, Michelle, are the parents of 4 children, and he has recently started a new development finance production company with a focus on elevated thriller feature films. We can't wait to jump in and get all the scoops. So let's take you back to being a starry-eyed BYU student and in humanities, thinking your life is going to take a certain direction and then not knowing where it's going to go. Take us to that point and then how things started to open up for you.
Yeah, sure. So I was in the middle of my schooling and without being real certain where I was going to go or what my path was going to be. And it was that point when a roommate gave me really solid advice, turned out being great advice in retrospect. But he knew that I had a real passion for film, even though I wasn't pursuing it really as a course of study or career. But he mentioned to me that there was this amazing film festival going on just up the road every year, which is Sundance. And why wasn't I volunteering up there? I said, I don't know. And so I rectified that and I started getting involved with the festival. And he also said, he knew I was looking for a major because I was undeclared at the time. And he recommended to me humanities just as this wonderful general course of an arts education as a way to give myself just this very broad survey of other things I might be interested in. But not just that. Specifically, he said you could probably create a film emphasis within that major. And so all those things I actually went out and got done. Long story short, they allowed me to declare this sort of emphasis, which hadn't really existed before, meaning film emphasis inside of the humanities major. And then I found myself up in Park City, the Sundance Film Festival, volunteering, just taking tickets, but being around this amazing film culture and seeing all these people that were really bootstrapping themselves up into an industry that I didn't know was very accessible. And all of a sudden, it seemed more accessible to me. And so that was the point at which I think I started realizing this maybe could be my professional course.
I love what you did there, that exposure. We were just talking about this the other day about how important it is for creatives to get that exposure, to create relationships, to have experiences so that it adds to their tool belt. And I love that your roommate is the instigator of that and just moving you to act on that and just to show up and see what that experience can do. So how did you then hook into the whole Disney culture and pathway?
Yeah, that was it was through relationships. Like you said, I was doing the things I mentioned here. I graduated school. My wife graduated ahead of me and was the breadwinner, and she was teaching elementary education there in the area. We're still living in Provo at the time. And so I decided to not pursue graduate studies, but to just start to get as many jobs as I can, to get practical education by working. And so I had a few contacts and I worked in as many sort of local film productions as I could find, and learned a lot more than I had in school about sort of how the set works and what the different departments did and what the different job opportunities might be for me, because I knew no one just jumps into directing or producing. If you're a writer, perhaps you could start with that too, but I wasn't sure that that was me. So I was doing all of that and realizing after, a good year and a half of that I needed something more sort of solid and something hopefully a little bit more reliable, which is hard to find, frankly, in this industry. It's not the nature of film work. Usually it is sort of project to project, and there's always a little bit of that uncertainty baked into it. But I had one relationship. He was a friend that was actually a cousin to my brother-in-law, right? So
It's on the genogram somewhere. Okay.
it is loosely based. I just call him a cousin, but we met a little bit. But I knew that he was out in LA and he was working in the film industry, and so I just called for advice. and learned what I could. And he said that, anyone who's looking for kind of a steady job out here, everyone starts as an assistant, which just means you're doing administrative work for any number of executives or creatives or people who are more established. So I said, great, I'm happy to do that. Obviously, I'm just getting started. And I had built out a resume at that point because I had been working hard on the ground there in Provo on all these various projects. And so I got in the resume, and that began a process that was a long, drawn out thing, which basically had me out there couch surfing with my sister, who was living in the Inland Empire, and trying to follow up on job leads, and sending my wife and now young daughter up to live with their parents temporarily while I was trying to get a foothold. And it wasn't easy. That was 3 long months of real uncertainty. And for me, the important thing was that I said, I don't know if I'm going to get a job within this film industry or the studio system in particular, but I need to get a job because I need to support my family. And so I was taking whatever few interviews I could generate. And then I was also pursuing just a sort of a practical, accessible job. In this case, I was interviewing at UPS just to be able to get a paycheck. And I finally got an interview through the influence of my friend that I mentioned before, who was working at Disney inside the system. And he had enough influence to get me in the room to have a chat with someone. And luckily that turned into a job as an assistant to a young executive. And the day I got that call offering me that job was the same day that I got a call from UPS offering me that job too. And luckily I was able to take the film related position, but I was more than ready to take the other job just to get an apartment and get my family down back with me. So it was one of those big leaps that I needed to take just to get that foothold. And so you mentioned the question was about Disney culture. I was telling you the long road about just getting into Disney and the way it was. Yeah, sorry. So go ahead.
No, so good. And
Yeah,
I love that pattern. And for creatives that are listening, this is so beautiful. Instead of A plus B equals C, it's not like that. So
no,
the fact that you had that, I love how you called it leap of faith. That's exactly what I had on my notes. This leap of faith that we all face as creatives, and not just once. And the stakes get higher and higher, the deeper and broader and more expansive we go. But I love that you had this moment of choice, that you had to decide if you're going to put something behind this. And then you're all in, you're couch surfing, right? It's not beautiful. And there is this sitting with uncertainty. And I think this is an important piece for creatives, is learning how to sit with that uncertainty. And I love that you bring up, there was a certain kind of a timeline. You did need to have a day job to pay the bills. And you're showing Heavenly Father, I know I need to do this to be responsible, and I feel compelled to do this. So can you try to show me which path I need to go, because I'm willing to do this here, but I would love to do this. Help me see something happen, something drop for me, right?
yeah,
And boom, that beautiful moment of it could have gone one way or the other, sliding doors there. So
yeah.
take us to, as you went into this Disney culture, what were some of the skill sets that you feel like Heavenly Father prepared you with, that you maybe not have noticed, and then some skill sets you had to learn right off the bat?
Sure. Yeah. The stuff that I carried into this interview was my passion for film, filmmaking, and having a decent knowledge about what that was and who was doing it. And so I had, in other words, I'd spent a lot of time watching film, reading about film and studying about it, and even just picking up the periodicals and knowing what was sort of happening at the time. So I was up to speed. So I felt qualified there, even though the job you go in for, in this case, it's administrative. You're there to support someone who's doing that work. And so that's where I needed to be a quick study. I wasn't like a super proficient secretarial person. I hadn't spent time on a desk covering phones and writing calendars and this and that. But those are things that anyone, with a little bit of persistence, you can pick that up. Those are things you can obviously figure out if you're not already good at them. So I did that. I had to sort of backfill that skill set. But I think the only reason that I got that job was because I could speak knowledgeably and passionately about the film industry. And so she felt like that was the most important. My boss, I think, later told me that was what she knew was going to be really helpful to her and making her job easier.
So good. And I love that you stayed relevant no matter what. Even if you had been working at UPS, you would have been reading those periodicals. You would have still been moving forward on
Yeah,
staying relevant and knowing what's happening. And like you said, the lingo, the buzzwords, who's who, all of the things. So when the moment comes, you got that opportunity plus preparation equals success. So I love that you showed how that happened, and that you were humble. You were willing to take that exposure to this environment, and knowing that if you show up in this environment, something's going to click at some point because you're going to end up being in the right place at the right time. So what were some of the skills that you maybe were surprised that you needed to learn to be able to move forward in this?
Well, the interesting thing is that I didn't take that job thinking that that was necessarily the ladder that I was going to be climbing for future success. I didn't think I was going to necessarily remain in the studio system. I was just feeling lucky to have a job that was in the industry and where I could learn. And I thought it would be a way station where I would then be able to cultivate because remember, my experience was sort of watching all these independent filmmakers come through Sundance and the Filmmakers Lab. And I thought that's the way I was going to be able to break through as a filmmaker. So I was trying to keep sort of one eye on that side hustle while I was doing my day job. But of course, all the while learning more and more about the studio system. And spoiler alert, I wound up staying there for the next 20, 25 years because, first of all, it made sense as I was raising a family to have that stability. I wasn't going to leave that without having something kind of solid. And it's very, very hard, as it turns out, to get something solid in the independent filmmaking space. So I wound up staying, but also I think I was learning, how to comport myself in a corporate environment and how to communicate well and how to sort of pick your moments in terms of sort of when you had an opinion to share. Because when I eventually got into a position where I was actually in staff meetings amongst other sort of senior executive types, there is a way that if you were very ambitious and trying to get into their jobs, there's a way you could overplay that hand, but you really need to be good at what you're doing in the moment and prove yourself in the job that you're doing and prove to be of use to those around you. And then what you get is a bunch of people that will support you in whatever efforts that you have in mind. And it's a way of having other people sort of come to you rather than you sort of banging on the door and overwhelming other people. There's a balance there. I think everyone needs to have their ambition in mind and have that fuel them to action, but you can't be too forceful or too arrogant in that process. And so I don't know if I had to learn that, but I observed that that's what was necessary. And so by the time I actually made the leap from an administrative job into a creative job at the studio, it really came at the invitation of the senior management that was working with me. And they said, we'd like you to come do this. And again, it wasn't a set goal for me to become that, but it was an opportunity that presented itself that I realized I would be a fool not to take it. And that kept me there for another 12 years.
So genius. And the principles that you bring up, I think of Elder Bednar's talk, quick to observe. You seem very good at being able to be quick to observe, understand your role with respect to what's going on. And I love how you bring up, yes, have that desire, but don't let it overwhelm what's happening right now, to bring value to where you are right now. And
Yeah.
people are always watching who's good at what they do, who's responsible, who shows up, who is invested in the success of the project and not just looking good and shining. So I love that you bring that up, because sometimes it can feel like, how am I ever going to break out of this? I'm just paying my dues constantly. And yet the Lord has a timetable and he has opportunities, but we've got to make the most of the ones that we have right now by bringing that value. I love that. So as you were doing this, it seems to me, and I've listened to interviews you've done and read on things that you've done, it seems to me you have a real skill set with being able to synergize and manage people. Don't know if synergize is an actual word, but it's a great one. But I think about all that goes into making a film successful. And you look at the credits at the end, and it always stuns me that all of these people and all the potential for things going wrong and so many things that are out of people's control and just the plates that are spinning. I don't even know how it can come about that a film is made and then it's so successful. So can you help us understand what are some of the things that you've learned about managing people and a project and those kinds of variables that we don't often think about as a creative, but are so vital to getting that vision being able to come to fruition?
Yeah, it's a good question. And that's something that it took me a long time to learn. Because remember, for the longest time, I was working internally and I was not producing, but you were working with teams, you were working on the teams that were getting the movies made. And that led me to the point where I was then producing later in my career, which was where I wanted to be. It was a long, long path to get to where I think I'd always wanted to be in the beginning, but there was amazing experiences along the way. And I actually really valued all the jobs that got me there. But to your question, I think that the most sort of important aspect of what I've observed and learned and have seen to be true, which is when you're working with teams, first of all, you have to listen as much as you talk. You have to appreciate all the effort other people are putting forward. And a lot of times your job is to decide when there needs to be a course correction or a change, whether you're working with a writer and you're giving notes on a script, or whether you're talking to a department head that, where something isn't quite working and you need to make a shift, to always do that with a level of understanding, compassion for the effort that they're giving. And so to be sensitive to the process that everyone's individuals, especially in a creative field, and they're putting a big piece of themselves in whatever they're offering. And so you have to always be aware of that. And so be gentle when you're looking for changes and when you're giving some kind of note back to make an alteration, whatever it might be. So all of that is about valuing the person's effort and valuing the individual themselves. And so another way of saying that is kind of knowing who your people are. There are, as you mentioned, on a film, once you get into the production of a film, there are hundreds of people involved in making that. But the truth is there's a subset of those people that are really in charge of what's getting made and how it's getting made. And you really have to know those people really well. And then beyond that, I try to know the teams as well as I can so that they feel like they're individuals and they're known to you and that you care about them and you care about the work that they're doing. And so to me, that's the best culture you can create and hope for. You can do all that and still films are very, very tricky. And we could talk all day about how that still doesn't guarantee you that the film succeeds, but it does, I think, help guarantee that you're getting the best out of your team.
And that's what I see is that this principle and your particular skill set in this is just so elevated in being able to not just get something accomplished, but to draw the best out of people and then make it as a meaningful and cohesive and enjoyable experiences as you can. Because at the end of the day, the film's going to be done and gone and it will be 10 years later. But those relationships and the connections that you've made, those are the things that are going to still foment those things in the future and future opportunities and future joy, right? The now and later. Yeah. So if you can take us to, with talking about films, there's so much pressure, I would imagine. The money, the honoring the Disney culture, the reputation, all of those things on the line. Was there an experience that you really did feel like, I don't think I can do this, or I don't think this film's going to make it, or I don't think we can, it was like a valley for you that I just don't know how we're going to make it through this?
Yeah, I would say those moments definitely occur. I mean, when you're working, especially when you're working inside of a studio system where you're making these huge bets and a lot of money is being spent, you do just sort of have to trust in the process. You arrive at each decision with a lot of deliberation, a lot of discussion in terms of why do we like this idea? Why do we like the individual we're hiring to help work on this idea? And you don't want to spend your time just looking in the rearview mirror, second guessing everything. You want to move forward with confidence and treat everything with a degree of confidence, because if you don't, then I think you can become really preoccupied with all these concerns, and that will not allow you to do your best work. So there is an art, I think, to moving forward and to maintaining positivity. I don't think anything gets made without that. It takes so many people to find consensus to get something made, especially, again, when you're making a big, expensive studio project, that you have to kind of, I think, maintain that attitude. So there are times, though, when the crisis comes in and you feel like here's a big problem to be solved, and it can feel daunting. And I certainly have felt that. But I always have trusted that you have enough good people around you that we're going to figure out a solution. There always is a solution, especially in filmmaking and creativity. There's always another way to get something done, whether you're losing a bunch of budget, so you have to alter the script. And these limitations can be the absolute inspiration for better sort of inventiveness, and quite often are. So I think that's true, even if it's not a creative issue. Just there's always a solution to be had. You need to sort of just pull together your resources, have the discussions, and figure out what to do, and then go and do it. So I think that attitude has helped me to never be too daunted to get through it. And again, I hasten to say that in film, so many films don't work, right? Again, the ultimate measure is just financial, right? Whether they actually find an audience and get their money back is the only real way to measure the success. Well, I'm sorry, that is not the only way to measure it. It's the most important way to measure it within the business, right? That's the ultimate arbiter of whether anything's working, is if it's succeeding financially. For me, honestly, my goal was always to try to ensure that the film was the best version of itself that it could be. And sometimes, even if it doesn't find its audience right away, and we could all point to dozens of examples of this, that the movie can have a long life after its initial theatrical release and will eventually find its audience. And I've had the pleasure of working on a few films where they weren't heralded as big box office successes at the time, but that you find people over a generation or two of film goers that really come to enjoy and value that movie. And that to me is almost more rewarding, because it feels like, well, the film and the quality of the film won out, and it ultimately did find its audience, even if it wasn't marketed or didn't find it correctly because there was a big snowstorm on the eastern seaboard on the given date you opened. It got there eventually.
That's so satisfying, because then it just took a little longer to cross that finish line, but this
Yep.
underdog feeling of, okay, it had its day.
Yep.
It got its due. I
Yep.
love this. So how have you, it just, everything you're sharing sounds so gospel principle, to be honest. I mean, I'm thinking about, okay, I'm not going to get too overly daunted about this. And I think President Hinckley, it'll all work out, right?
Mhm.
Have there been some gospel principles or holy habits, things that you've done in your life that have helped you to keep that sort of metronome beat, that it's just going to be okay, we're just going to keep moving through it? Has there been anything that's helped you keep that?
That's a good question. A lot of my approach and attitude was formed early in terms of how you deal with, others, how you deal with big challenges, how you deal with potential crisis. And so obviously a lot of those behaviors were learned, me growing up in a large family, going to church, learning solid principles about loving your neighbor, and about, the simple principles of kindness and empathy, which, my family's quick to tell you that I'm not perfect in any of these regards, but I did see the value in that and understand it. And I think that was what I did bring to the table when I was both coming up through the ranks within the studio and then actually working as a producer on a set, just trying to operate from a position of empathy and understanding, and knowing that, sort of gentle encouragement is going to be better than, trying to come down hard on people. So those things absolutely, I think, were portable sort of concepts and ideas that I brought in from my background as a member.
I love that. And especially being able to do that consistently, because you're doing that in your family, you're doing that in your callings. It's like it has to become a way of life and seeps right into what you're doing on the daily basis in your work and your projects. And speaking of relationships, because this seems to be a through line through everything that you've experienced in your life, this is such a volatile industry, and you were lucky or blessed and privileged to be able to be in a place that's more stable. But still, there were long hours or tough years. How did you and your wife navigate this with family life? I know it's a challenge for everyone across the board in any industry, but
Yeah.
how was her feeling about this industry and what you were doing, and how was she able to navigate that and support that?
Yeah, that was a learning process, especially early, because the hours were very long. And as we added to our family and had these young kids coming up, we have wonderful kids. They're all a handful, and it's a huge job, maybe the toughest job in the world, just to raise these kids. And I was, for long periods of the whole day, like many people have, well, who knows? I mean, some people have jobs that let them off just around dinner time, whatever. I was typically coming home after that. And so finding that balance was very challenging. And so I really had to rely on Michelle to sort of pick up the slack. The only good thing was that I did work close to home. We didn't live far from the office. And as I got a little bit more latitude in my job to break out, I could sometimes take some hours in the day to see a game or to go to, a certain recital or whatever it was, to try to be more present as the father. But then you try to make up for it on weekends. But I absolutely was in a great debt to Michelle, who was able to, I think, take all of her skill set as a teacher and as mom to really support me in my absence for a lot of those hours. But I was, like I said, most of the time was working closer to home and was able to be there and able to at least make the important moments really count. And it wasn't until much later in life that I started producing, in which case, if a film is not being made here locally, you got to go with film. And so I found myself living abroad for long, long stretches of time. And if that had been my vocation when the kids were young, because that happened only when my youngest was already in his teenage years. And so the kids were a little bit more established and they gone through a lot of the growing pains. But I often wondered if I was doing this when the kids were younger and the family was younger. I don't know how that would have worked. It would have been even more challenging. So I acknowledge that this is not an easy path sometimes to find the balance with family life and work. But I think that Michelle made it possible for me to do that successfully.
So beautiful. And I love the timing of that Heavenly Father is involved with that timeline and how beautifully you were able to be so close to home for most of that chunk of the kids and that growing stages of needing you more right there, even if you're not right there, being knowing that you could be and that you were accessible at least there.
Yeah.
That's such a pivotal piece. And I love that as you look back at your journey, you get this moment of where you are, since you've been involved for so many years, you get kind of this ability to have hindsight and look back. And as
Yeah.
you do, I would love to know, I know this is so hard, even for authors, what's one of the most meaningful books or whatever, but is there a project to you that stands out as one of the most meaningful or the one that you're most proud of? And why would that be?
Last count, I think I worked on something like 45 movies while I was there and several since. But there's two films that stood out for me for different reasons. And one was a true story about a guy who became a professional baseball pitcher. It's called The Rookie. And it was adapted from a headline that landed in the LA Times about this guy, Jimmy Morse, who much later in life thought he had no shot, that his career was washed up. He was a high school teacher, nothing wrong with that, but his dreams of playing baseball were long gone. But found somehow in his recovery that he actually had a faster fastball than he had as a younger person. And he winds up actually making it up into the professional ranks. And so that story was, first of all, is just a really wonderful, inspirational, true story. And we had the amazing and sort of charmed sort of process where the first draft, we had just the right writer, this talented writer, Mike Rich, who came in and the first draft virtually was the one that we wound up shooting with very few changes. And we wound up with the exact right director, again, through just, I think, a lot of, every time one door would close, the right door would open. And so it was just a very charmed experience on a movie that I felt really, really proud to be a part of, just because both the quality of the film and kind of the impact of the movie and the way it made you feel. And I could go on and on about that, but that was just a great experience that was very unique because of the rare sort of path it took in getting there. The sort of most processes have to go up and down and back and forth. This was just had, like I said, a very kind of charmed experience. And then the other one was Parts of the Caribbean. The first film was something that was born out of just a passion to figure out what we could do kind of differently that we weren't doing at the studio. And so me and two close friends who were both working at the studio would get together and just sort of figure out, imagine if we ran the studio for a day, what would we want to make? And so we actually spent time in our, sort of off hours here and there developing some projects on our own, which is, it's part of the mandate of your job. But we had sort of formalized that in a way and really devoted some time to it. And this title was obviously, it's derived from a theme park ride in Disneyland. Josh Harmon, one of our collaborators there, said, why don't we pursue an idea with that title? And then we spent, several months just actually developing that idea on our own into an outline. And so by the time there was an opportunity to actually pitch it, we had something in hand, in a regular staff meeting. And that really got the ball rolling and got the film made eventually. And so it was a very rare and unique process to get that going internally the way we did and to see it. And of course, that was just getting the ball rolling. We had to rely on the amazing creative that ultimately came to the project in the form of our writers and the director and the producers. And they obviously, translated that in the best possible way in our minds. But it was still something that we could feel proudly like we set that on a course and we achieved a goal. It was very difficult. And so a lot of things had to go right for that to happen, but it was really, really super satisfying that it came out the way it did.
That's incredible. The genesis of that, it makes me think of, I heard that Spielberg and Lucas got together when it was Raiders of the Lost Ark, that they were
Yeah.
sitting at a deli table or something like that. And they were like, well, I'd love to have this in a movie. And what would you love to have in a movie? I'd love to have this. And that's kind of the genesis of what created all the good, chunky, good pieces of that Raiders of the Lost Ark. And you could just feel the creative experience, the joy that comes from this what if, and then being able to see it come to fruition. Just so beautiful that whole experience could be birthed into not just one movie, but so many successful movies from that. This has been amazing. I do want to touch on really quickly for those that are wanting to come into the film industry. And I'm sure in every industry, there's, especially for artists, there's this pie in the sky and I think I could do and I want to do. And you want to find a balance of reality and imagination, of being able to feel that vision of where you feel you can go, but still put some substance behind it. Do you have a piece of advice for people who are wanting to break into this industry and really feel like They are called to create good messages to put on screen and to provide for people to enjoy and to feel uplifted and to feel moved by.
So, advice for people who are trying to break in, is that
Mhm.
the idea? I think, and again, it just comes from my own sort of lived experience, which is that there are a lot of great sort of dreams we all have about where we can get to in terms of actually creating something, if it's in film, making films. But it's actually incredibly daunting because they take such huge resources and time and collaboration. And so for me, the attainable dream, like, don't give up on that dream, don't put aside, just know it's a process to get there, and that you need a lot of amazing collaboration in this industry. I'm just speaking specifically to my industry of film and television would be related too. And so knowing that you're going to need incredible sort of support, collaboration, help, in so many ways, it's like pursue something that you can achieve. And that for me was like finding an entry level job where you could actually go and sort of, earn a paycheck, cover your overhead, pay the bills. That also becomes a school for you, and it also becomes a very real network, especially if you can do that job well. And like we talked about, and actually build trust amongst those around you. And that's going to lead to other sorts of introductions and friendships. And ultimately, inevitably, going to lead to the key collaborations that you're going to need to actually make the bigger thing that is what your goal is. And so I think that it's like having a real attainable, it's like breaking something down, a goal into bite-sized chunks. How can I actually do something proactive to get there? Instead of trying to, you don't eat the whole elephant at once. It's just, it's a little spoonful at a time. That's how you got to do it. And I think this industry especially. And so very rare is the case where someone can go off and on their own steam, create the big thing that then launches a career. It happens, but it's truly the exception to the rule, as opposed to someone who puts themselves in a position to find, again, the key support and collaborators that are going to help you get there. And so that process is very attainable. In that process, you can prove to yourself and to others that you are worthy of more and more responsibility, and you can, eventually get to where you need to be. So that is my simple advice.
Love it. And I think that's been that thread through everything that we've talked about today, just to kind of encapsulate that, is really focusing on the relationships, no matter where you're at,
Yep.
seeing and valuing the people that are before you, and then looking for those catalytic opportunities that you can say, okay, even if it isn't the ideal thing that I want, it's getting me in the environment. It's helping me get exposure. It's helping me learn the ropes. It's helping me get a tool belt of things that I need. So valuing not just the people, but also the opportunity that's also before you. And
Yep.
then it sounds like partnering with Heavenly Father to keep that through line of, it's all going to be okay. I'm just going to keep showing up. I'm going to keep doing my best, and things will work out, and they'll work out in the way that they need to if I keep showing up, learning, being relevant, and being able to bring value to the table. I think this is just such good advice, because no matter where that path takes a creative, it will be a fulfilling and meaningful path that they'll still be able to share whatever it is that they need in a way that Heavenly Father wants them to give value and to shine. So I love this. Thank you so much. I know people are probably going to want to say, I want to know more. I want to know more about him. I want to reach out to him. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
I would say that we can connect through our current company at Intention Film, which is, we're based partly in Utah and partly here in California. And that is my new ongoing concern. So if you just write to me, Brigham at Intention Film, that's my best contact.
Fantastic. I'm sure there are people listening who are like, tell me more, tell me more. Thank you so much for taking your time with us today and sharing such great pearls of wisdom. So appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Thank you. And for those that have enjoyed this interview and got so much out of it, please check out those other interviews that we have. So many great gems, 3 other seasons, as well as the original season that have Steve Young, Al Caraway, it has Gerald Lund, it has people like Dr. Stacey Taniguchi who've climbed the mountains and gone to the valleys, that can help you learn these tips and tools, principles and practices that can help you on your journey of being called to create.